Hey everyone, welcome to Strange Stories, where we explore near-death experiences and supernatural stories from people who've had a glimpse of the other side. If you enjoy our content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel. Without further ado, let's get to the story of the day. Story number 1. I had an imaginary friend named Mr. Cardine from the age of 3 to 8. He would transport me to locations outside of my body and tell me what would happen to me and other family members. Other beings were visible, but Mr. Cardine was not. I could see people having conversations and listen in on their plans when I was out of my body. It was difficult to understand why others didn't believe me when I told them what was going to happen. Mr. Cardine was always pleasant and never made me feel threatened. I assumed that everyone knew Mr. Cardine and that I would tell everyone about him. I quickly became the target of mockery and bullying because no one believed my stories or that I had an imaginary friend. My mother became concerned because I was telling her about events that had occurred and were about to occur. Her concern for my behavior prompted her to visit a holiness preacher who began to tell me that Mr. Cardine was not real. I would tell him about my life, and he would tell my mother to take me to the doctor. The doctor instructed me to murder Mr. Cardine, and my parents requested that I notify them when he died. Mother became enraged and spanked me one day while I was conversing with some of the other beings, and father did the same when he returned home. Mr. Cardine was the most important being in that realm. He could force everyone else to leave. I couldn't hear or see him, but I could feel his presence. We communicated verbally, but I'm not sure how well I understood him. I would also see many other beings. Some of them resembled molten tar piles, and I was terrified of them. They could move through walls, and I could tell they had no boundaries because I knew what boundaries were. I mostly recall their presence when my parents were arguing or drinking and arguing. Mr. Cardine had the ability to drive the tar-like beings away. Mr. Cardine was the last person I saw before I had to tell my parents he had fallen off the roof, broken his leg, and died. He told me to do it and promised to always be there for me. But I couldn't talk to him because of the beatings my parents started giving me when they found out I was talking to him. Let's fast forward to my 39th birthday. On July 14, 1995, my life changed forever. I had been breaking out in hives for 21 years and had no idea what was causing them. I ate a peanut butter sandwich and the hives appeared 5 minutes later. One hive was beneath my navel and it was the worst I'd ever had. In the mirror, I watched the hive circle my body in a circle that ended back at the hive's origin. My body felt like it was on fire at the time. I knew I had to get to the hospital right away. I was dizzy when I arrived at the hospital, so I walked in the ambulance door and the staff nurse told me to go to admissions and fill out the forms. I told her I couldn't stand up any longer and asked for a wheelchair. After a brief argument, she agreed to take my information. I sat in front of her and told her I needed to lie down after a few questions. I lay down on the floor where I heard her say something. The next thing I knew, I was floating above my body, watching as people performed CPR on me. "Why are you worried so much in your life?" said a voice. I took another look at my body. "What good is it now?" said the voice. I turned to see who was speaking, and the ceiling was no longer an impediment. I went outside and searched the night sky for the source of the voice. I didn't recognize it at first and became fixated on a star. The star grew in size and I was engulfed in its light. When I looked toward the source of light, I noticed that it was coming from an oval-shaped core of colors that were swirling around in beautiful patterns. I knew I was supposed to go in that space when the colors began to form as space. The voice then said, and I recognized it, "Here is your secure home, which you built while you were alive. Have you completed all of your goals in life?" I was thinking about my unfinished wood carvings. That instant, I was back in my body. I could feel the nurse's weight pressing against my chest and compressing my heart. What the hell am I doing back here? I wondered. I was then transferred to the doctor's cubicle. He began inserting tubes into my arm and conversing with me. He asked, "How are you feeling?" and told me not to close my eyes. I relaxed when I heard Mr. Cardine's voice. "This is what happens to evil people," he explained. Then I noticed a man I'd never seen before. He had a terrified expression on his face, as if he knew where he was going and why. He then turned to a cloud of light with colorful light swirling around in the center. The cloud formed a point that drew the entire cloud into the tar-like being, when I suddenly saw one of the tar-like beings. I saw a woman do the same thing, and then several others followed suit. "This will happen to your mother," Mr. Cardine predicted. I awoke on the stretcher, the doctor yelling at me to hold on. "You have to hold on. Don't close your eyes," he said. What the hell am I doing back here? I wondered. I was on the stretcher when Mr. Cardine said, "We're going on a journey." I noticed the ceiling's material's composition and found myself moving in the dark. Mr. Cardine was present, so I wasn't afraid. We came across something I can't describe other than to say it was the biggest thing I'd ever seen. It was alive and aware that I was present. It was communicating with Mr. Cardine, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. We resumed our movement only to come to a halt in the presence of another larger being, even larger than the first. They both looked away from each other and at me. I've never felt so good in my life. I was overcome with emotion. I tried to say something, but I couldn't communicate at all. Mr. Cardine and I were suddenly on the move, and the last words I heard him say were, "You made the decision to live. You will suffer while assisting others." I was awakened by the doctor yelling at me to hold on and wake up. "What the hell am I doing back here?" I asked as he slapped me. I'm not afraid to die since that experience. I'm not in a hurry to die, but I do want to return to that plane of existence. I believe that the more I help others, the better my next home will be. Story number 2. After being seriously injured in a near-fatal car accident, I had a near-death experience. Due to complications, I was unable to breathe and required a ventilator before falling into a coma. Since waking up from a coma, I've had vivid memories of being on the other side of the veil in a heavenly realm. Everything was engulfed in a bright mist. The light was all around us. It even passed through me. I recall looking at my hand and seeing the light pass through it. My hand was translucent, which surprised me. His countenance shone with such brightness as I walked with a heavenly being. I don't even know where to begin to describe it. I recognized this heavenly being as Jesus because he reminded me of a familiar friend. He didn't say anything about himself because it wasn't necessary. I remember walking with Jesus, but not in the physical sense. Our walk is best described as floating in mid-air, a bare spare above the ground of a lovely garden. Everything in this garden had a white and bright overall experience. The bright green of the plants caught my attention. I could see the water, as well as a bright glow around it. The water, burbling, made a musical sound. The water stream almost sang. The water was crystal clear. I recall wanting to bend down and drink from the stream that ran through the garden we were walking through. When I tried to scoop up water with my hands, the water literally ran through them, and it wasn't wet. While I was bent over trying to drink this water, Jesus came to a halt and looked at me. His gaze was fixed on me. My desire for this water, even though I couldn't put it into my lips and drink it, vanished at that moment. I can't explain what I felt when the water ran through my hands, but I did feel something. I had this overwhelming desire to explore every aspect of this garden. I knew Jesus and I were communicating even though we didn't speak with our mouths. His countenance shone brightly, and it was clear how he felt about me. Simply by standing there, he exuded love and concern for me. The sense of calm I experienced was indescribable. I was given the option of returning to Earth and living another life, or staying with him in heaven. We both knew it would be difficult to return to Earth because I told him I only wanted to return if I could help others and myself. He knew I didn't want to spend any more time on Earth if it meant being trapped in an unresponsive body with no way of communicating. The look of love in his eyes filled me with joy at the time, and as I recall that feeling of joy, I feel filled with joy all over again. I'm not sure how I did it, but I found myself in a hospital room, looking at my husband who was holding my hand and talking to me. Only I wasn't looking at things through my own eyes. I recognized myself and being outside of it from above. As I watched the scene, I had a strong desire to return to Earth and spend more time with my husband, if only I could communicate with him and help him. I was understood and my heart's desires were heard. The next thing I recall is being trapped in my body while others attended to my physical needs. I recall being able to tell what the nurses were thinking about me based on how they touched me. I could tell if they thought I was going to live or die by their touch. I could tell if they thought they were caring for a dead person whose spirit was not present. I recall trying to scream, "Look, I'm still alive. I've come in. I'm going to make it." I felt much more at ease and trusted someone if I knew they were caring for a living being. I could clearly read their minds. I recall communicating telepathically while in my spirit body. In that heavenly garden, this is how Jesus and I communicated. It was so simple. It took no effort. You had thoughts, and they were communicated. Speaking with my physical mouth is extremely difficult and frustrating. Sometimes we're misunderstood. People misinterpret what you're trying to say. The term soulmates refers to communication between two souls, also known as spirit-to-spirit communication. It is a profound experience to communicate on a spiritual level. I believe I've had this spiritual gift since my near-death experience, and it has greatly enriched my life as I use it. I have a strong desire to communicate with others on a spiritual level. I've discovered that the only way I can communicate on earth is through writing, but I need to mentally prepare myself to communicate on a spiritual level. I'm able to accomplish this by writing at home, away from distractions. We are what we believe. I find trivial thoughts annoying. I only watch television if it stimulates positive thoughts. I'm listening to different music now, and I'm drawn to the ethereal. My near-death experience has transformed me. I seek righteousness and despise evil. I'm actually grateful for my accident because while it has negatively impacted my physical abilities, it has also greatly enhanced my spiritual abilities. I've had a peaceful hopefulness ever since I woke up from my coma. I believe that the reason I'm still alive and have returned to Earth is to testify about the beauty of the spirit world and Jesus being who he said he was, a friendly brother in the spirit world. This understanding and belief has an impact on every aspect of my life. I believe I return to live more life, in part to fulfill my covenant with the Lord to share this message with anyone who will listen.